Today, I wanted to talk about Matthew 5:13 through 16, and so let's read that together. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt loses its saltiness, how will it become salty again? It's good for nothing except to be thrown away and trampled under people's feet. And I think I've got 14 through 16 here. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. So a couple of weeks ago, my previous director at work did a devotional about his dad. And it was the, I believe it was a Thursday or Friday before Father's Day. And he talked about his dad being the salt of the earth. He used this passage this morning, from that morning, as his topic to describe his dad. And so I thought it would be a good idea to kind of think through that idea of us as believers being that salt of the earth. So I brought this salt shaker. It's very plain. I haven't even opened it yet. I just stole it from the cabinet, sorry. It's full of salt. And I thought about that imagery of salt, and we'll talk a little more about that as we go through, but I also thought about the salt shaker itself. We all know what a salt shaker is for. It sits on the table and holds the salt. We grab it without thinking. But imagine inviting our friends over for dinner and noticing at the end of the meal that the salt shaker never moved. No one picked it up. No one sprinkled it on their food. It sat there looking exactly like it was designed to look, but it never accomplished the reason it existed. It would still be full of salt, be still sitting in the right place. It would still look useful, but it wouldn't have made any difference. And maybe it's not a plain white one from Walmart like this. Maybe it's a fancy crystal one with a silver top on it and ornate carving in it. But if you didn't use it, the salt would still be there. That picture reminds me of a book. So when I went to college, my degree is in youth ministry, believe it or not, which is perfectly legitimate for being an IT manager at a hospital. You'd be surprised. But in addition to that, part of my degree was missiology, so the study of missions, and so I had a lot of missions classes. And one of the books we read was a book by someone by the name of Becky Pippert, who wrote the book called Out of the Salt Shaker and Into the World. And she uses this imagery and this basis in Matthew chapter 5 to capture what Jesus is teaching. Salt isn't meant to stay in the shaker. It has to leave the container if it's ever going to fulfill its purpose. So as I was asked to do this, I kept thinking about this passage because it's one of the clearest pictures that Jesus gives us of what everyday discipleship should look like. Listen again to his words. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. You let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. So one of the first things that kind of sticks out is that Jesus doesn't begin with a command. He begins with an identity. He doesn't say, try harder to become salt. He doesn't say, maybe someday you'll become light. He says, you are. And throughout the Sermon on the Mount, which is what starts this chapter, Jesus isn't describing superheroes or giants of the faith. He's describing ordinary people whose lives have been transformed by following him. Before he ever tells us what to do, he reminds us of who we are. And that's only possible because of God's grace. Jesus isn't handing out a job description for people who have finally earned his approval. He's speaking to people he already has called to himself. Long before we ever got our pages all mixed up, long before we thought about following Christ, God was at work drawing us, pursuing us, and inviting us into his life. Behold, I stand at the door and knock, right? Our identity doesn't begin with performance, it begins with his grace. So our culture is filled with self-improvement advice. And my wife will tell you I am a sucker for a good self-improvement book, a good how to do your business book. I've got so many books on getting organized that I've made a mess of the organization of the books. right? Read another book, listen to another podcast, develop another habit. We have tiny habits, and we have atomic habits. Another habit, become a better version of yourself. Certainly, there's nothing wrong with personal growth. We should all continue to grow in wisdom and maturity. But sometimes the message subtly becomes, keep working on yourself until someday you're finally ready to make a difference. Well, Jesus kind of turns that around. Because of him, you already have an identity. Christian maturity isn't simply becoming a better version of ourselves through willpower. It's allowing God's grace to continue shaping us into the likeness of Christ. And as he changes us, he also begins working through us to bless the people around us. Or to say it another way, salt doesn't exist to change itself. It exists to change whatever it touches. Remember that sentence because it really kind of captures what I'm trying to say this week. Salt doesn't exist to change itself. It exists to change whatever it touches. So when Jesus called his followers salt of the earth, everyone who was listening immediately understood salt differently than most of us do today. For us, salt usually means seasoning. It even has taken on a negative connotation. Don't be salty, right? For them, it meant much more. It preserved food before refrigeration existed. It slowed decay. It protected what would otherwise spoil. It seasoned food like it does for us. It brought out flavors that were already there. And of course, anyone who's eaten something salty knows what comes next, right? You get thirsty. Y'all know about that, right? It gets hot. It gets hot. And salty makes it worse. Jesus doesn't separate those ideas. And I don't think we should separate them either. As believers, we faithfully live where God has placed us. And when we do, something begins to happen. We quietly slow the spread of decay by living with honesty, with kindness, with integrity and compassion in a world that often rewards the opposite. We add flavor to life, not because we're trying to be impressive, but because joy, hope, patience, forgiveness, generosity, they stand out more than we sometimes realize. And over time, people begin asking questions. They become thirsty. Wonder why Jesus said, anyone who will drink, come to me and I will bring you living waters. Right? Why? And that looks like this. Why are you always so calm? Why didn't you respond that way like everybody else does on I-4 when you got cut off? Why do you have hope when things aren't going your way? And without forcing conversations, our lives, the way we live our lives, can awaken a thirst that only Christ can satisfy. Notice that none of these require standing on a platform. Most of them happen in ordinary moments. Most of them happen on ordinary Tuesdays. And that's encouraging to me because a lot of us, we live ordinary lives. We go to work. We care for our family. We pay the bills. We answer emails. We drive, however slowly or if at all, on I-4. And that's exactly where Jesus says our influence belongs. So, if you didn't know, this is not my only thing. I don't just lead worship. I'm also full-time. I'm an IT manager at a big hospital. And I manage a pretty good-sized team of technicians. And most of the days, those technicians that work for us or with us aren't the people that patients ever notice. If everything is working right, most people don't even know that they're there. When a nurse scans a medication, when a physician opens a chart, when a monitor communicates correctly, someone behind the scenes has often spent hours making sure those systems simply work. Most days there's an applause. Most days success looks like crickets. And as we reflect on this passage, you may realize that's often how our Christian influence works too. Not with spotlights, not with headlines. It's quiet faithfulness. Doing good work because it honors Christ. Treating people with respect when they may not be so much. being patient when others are frustrated, owning mistakes, speaking truth gracefully, serving without needing recognition. Those moments may seem small, but over time, they become powerful because God uses ordinary faithfulness in extraordinary ways. Most of the people I know in my own life who have influenced my faith weren't famous speakers. They were just faithful. How many of you had a Sunday school teacher that you still remember that just had a huge impact on your life? Or maybe a teacher, or maybe a coworker, a parent who quietly prayed when maybe you were going a little bit this way. Looking back, for me, I can see that God often changes lives through people who simply keep showing up and living faithfully where he has placed them. Again, back to salt. Salt doesn't exist to change itself. It exists to create or change whatever it touches. And that's really good news because it takes the pressure off. Our job isn't to force results. Our job is simply to be faithful when Jesus has placed us. And here's a good picture. Like, I love cooking good steak. I love cooking, doing pork butts in the smoker, right? On their own, if you just cook it, it doesn't taste that good, right? You add that salt, it's amazing. So I can, and even if I mess it up, salt covers a multitude of sins. Yeah. So Jesus shifts the picture a little bit, and he says, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house." And at first, it looks like he's kind of changing the subject, but I don't think he is. Salt and light are telling the same story, but from two different angles. Salt quietly influences whatever it touches. Light visibly reveals what the darkness hides. Neither one exists for itself. Both exist for the benefit of others, and both point beyond themselves. And that's why verse 16 kind of comes to the destination of both those pictures. Jesus says, "In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." Notice the point. Not that people would admire us, not that they'd remember our names, not that they'd even think we're unusually kind. The goal is that, though, through our lives, people would see enough of God's character that their attention would be ultimately drawn to him. That picture of thirst. Just as the moon reflects the light of the sun, our lives should reflect the light of Christ. We don't manufacture that light. His grace shines through ordinary people who walk closely with him. It's that it's not that they notice us, it's that they notice the Father. And think about the Apostle Paul. In 1 Corinthians, he says, "I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth." And that's still how God works. Sometimes you plant, sometimes you water, sometimes someone else gets to see the harvest. Hello, parenthood. We're not raising good kids, we're hoping to raise good adults. And sometimes those seeds we don't see just yet. Maybe it takes someone else to water that seed. Maybe it takes someone else to throw the fertilizer, although I give my kids enough. You know what? Our responsibility is faithfulness. The results belong to God. That truth keeps us from getting discouraged. Maybe you prayed for a family member for years and you haven't seen much change. Maybe you've tried to love a difficult coworker and wondered if it makes any difference. Maybe you've attempted to live faithfully in a culture that often seems indifferent or even hostile to the gospel. Jesus doesn't tell us to measure our success by physical outcomes. He asks us to remain faithful. Salt doesn't keep being salt because the meal takes time. Light doesn't stop shining because the darkness is stubborn, and neither should we. I wonder how many stories we'll hear in eternity that we never knew about here. Maybe that Sunday school teacher that has no clue. I think about the preacher or the gentleman that invited a young man into a tent revival. And in that tent revival, that young man heard Billy Sunday preach. Well, Billy Sunday preached, and this young man gave his life to Christ. Maybe you've heard of Billy Graham. Who was throwing the salt there? That gentleman who invited him in when him and his friend were just going to go the other way. Maybe a nurse remembers the coworker who consistently spoke peace during a stressful shift. Maybe someone comes to faith years later because they couldn't ever quite forget the way that one believer consistently lived differently. And that's okay, because the point has never been our recognition. Jesus has already told us where the glory belongs, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Every act of kindness, every word of encouragement, every honest conversation, every unseen act of service, every decision to forgive, each one becomes another opportunity for someone to catch a glimpse, not of us, but of the Father. Again, both metaphors pointing to the same thing. Both exist for the good of others. Both quietly transform their surroundings, and both direct attention away from themselves toward God. I know for me, maybe a lot of you as well, have spent a lot of time asking, God, what's your will for my life? Kids ask it. College kids, they're getting ready to graduate. What's your will for my life? Maybe you're towards the end of your working career and looking towards retirement, or maybe you're already there. What's my will for my life, no matter how long or short? It's a good question. Perhaps another question is just as important. Lord, who have you already placed in my life? Where have you already put me? Because before God calls us somewhere else, he almost always calls us to be faithful where we already are. And I'd like to end it where we began, with that salt shaker sitting on the table. It's there. It's comfortable. But it isn't accomplishing its purpose if it's just sitting there. Salt fulfills its purpose only when it leaves the shaker. In the same way, God hasn't called us to simply gather here on Sunday mornings. He gathers us so he can scatter us again. And tomorrow, he'll scatter some of us into offices, hospitals, neighborhoods, homes, parks. Those aren't random places. They are the places where God has strategically placed his people. There are people you can influence that I never will. There are conversations you'll have that Pastor Dan won't ever get to have. There are relationships that belong uniquely to you, and God has entrusted those people to your care. Salt doesn't exist to change itself. It exists to change whatever it touches. Let me read that scripture one more time. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall the saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out, trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. So, this week, let's be willing to get out of the salt shaker. That's one of the things we're called to here as we lead worship and as we go to the table, is to help prep you to spread that salt out to the world. Amen? So go out and be salty the good way.